Thank you for joining me. I have with me Pennsylvania Representative Jessica Benham from the 36th District, and I appreciate you being with me here at the Disability and Mental Health Summit because I think your connection to the community is so important. And you've always seemed very connected to the neighborhoods that you serve. Let's start with just what made you want to serve in public office for your community?
Absolutely. So when I was first running, I came from a background in the disability and mental health world, particularly in the autism services space. And so for me, I've carried a lot of that into my work in the legislature. I think it's really important for those of us who have particular lived experiences. So I'm a person who's got multiple disabilities. I'm on the autism spectrum. I have some mobility disabilities as well, and things that are not always obvious or visible. And I think it's important to take that lived experience and use it not just to advocate for my community, but to lift up the voices of people who are often unheard in the legislature.
Well, that is absolutely so important. Bringing that lived experience to the light of others who do not have it is so crucial. And I guess that really helps with having the lived experience, understanding what the day in the life is like for folks with disabilities. I mean, you mentioned your own, but your awareness of other disabilities. What does it mean to you personally to serve the constituents that, so that they would feel comfortable reaching out to you? How does that make you feel when you know the folks reach out to you because they know you can help?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about serving an elected office is that you and your staff get to be resources for other people. Folks are, I think, pretty comfortable dropping by my district office and asking my staff for help on a variety of different issues. And when I'm here and not in Harrisburg, I'm always happy to chip in as well. And then in the Capitol, I think the Capitol is a particularly intimidating place for everybody, but particularly for folks who've often been excluded from public life. And so I try to create a welcoming space in my office where people feel like it's a space where I actually want them to be,
right,
and not a space where they're kept out or made to feel uncomfortable.
Well, I know that folks love the welcoming environment and therefore probably feel more comfortable in speaking with you. Is there something that stands out that maybe a constituent brought to your attention that really stands out as something you're like, I can really represent you here? Is there any one thing that you think of when I say that?
I don't know that there's any one thing in particular. At this point, I've had so many different conversations over the going on 6 years that I've served in this role that it's hard to pinpoint one specifically. But it's been great to do a lot of work in the human services space. It's been a lot of what I've focused on in the legislature, and getting to work on bills like that people have brought to my attention, problems that they're facing. It's been really wonderful.
And I'd imagine when folks bring those problems to your attention, the level of understanding that you have versus someone who has never touched the disability community, what kind of reactions do you see from the folks that come to you?
I think ideally the reaction that I hope to see is that folks feel like they're truly being heard. So often I think that people's experience with government has been a polite brush off. Right? They bring their issue to their legislator, and their legislator sits through the meeting, shakes their hand at the end of it, and says, "Thank you for your advocacy," and then there's nothing after that. And my hope is to provide a different experience, one that people leave feeling like they've got a path forward, like I'm going to take action on the issue to the best of my ability, and also feel like they can circle back and continue to update me.
And I think that really is at the heart of what we're trying to do here is that folks will come to you, they'll feel comfortable, they'll see you as a resource. What other kinds of conversations or experiences inspire you?
I think for me, what I think back on quite a lot are experiences that I had just after I was elected for the first time.
Okay.
When I was elected, I got a lot of media attention around being a legislator who was on the autism spectrum. And so I had young people and caregivers and older folks too all reach out to me and say, oh, this is wonderful. I feel like my own lived experience is reflected in your advocacy. I had parents say, I'm just so thrilled that my child can see somebody like you serve in a leadership role. And so when I'm thinking about the impact that my service has had on the lives of people with disabilities, those are moments I really come back to, because it's a platitude. We say how important representation is, and yet that's so real for many people who have not seen themselves represented or reflected in our government. And so it's not just something nice to say that representation matters, but it's something that I get to live every day.
And in the time that you've served, is there something that stands out as like the one thing that you pushed something through, or you saw the result of something and you're like, that is why I do what I do?
I think every legislator hopes to get a bill to become law, right? That's the work that we do is all geared toward that. Obviously we provide services in our office, and that's incredibly important. My staff are handling the bulk of that work.
Okay.
The work that I do is legislating. And so I've been lucky to have 2 bills signed by the governor. The most recent was this week. And those are moments where I can say, look, I'm proving people wrong. The people who thought that, oh, isn't that nice that we've got somebody who's on the autism spectrum in the legislature, but she's probably not going to be very good at the job. And here I am. I've had 2 bills signed by the governor that I was the prime sponsor of, that I've worked really hard to get done. And those are the moments where I get to say, look, I'm proving that autistic folks can do this work and can do it effectively. And hopefully that paves the way for folks who are coming after me.
I appreciate that, because all of those reasons are truly connecting our community. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So here with me, I have Representative Emily Kincaid from the 20th District in Pennsylvania. I appreciate you joining me here at the Disability and Mental Health Summit. And you've spent so much of your career advocating for people who needed someone in their corner, obviously including folks with disabilities and their families. What drew you first to this kind of community-centered work?
So I actually worked right after college at a community for people with developmental disabilities called L'Arche down in Washington, D.C. And it was, I interacted with them for the first time at a career fair. They were looking to hire community assistants, and it was not an area that I ever thought that I would, work in. I was like, oh, I don't know. And I think that sort of everybody who ends up working with people with disabilities has that moment where they're like, I don't know how to work with people with disabilities. And then you kind of just put yourself in the position to do it, and you realize it's actually not, it's not different. It's just like working with people.
Yes.
So I think that we build up in our heads this idea that you have to have special talents or you have to be specially trained, and it turns out you have to be willing to work with people. And so I spent a year living and working in that community. And after I left, eventually I went to law school, but I realized that the experience that I had in that community really helped me to be a better lawyer and a better advocate, because it taught me how to advocate for people and with people rather than, kind of just talking at them or around them. And I think that made me overall just a better advocate for everyone that I worked with.
Well, and I think that really paints a good picture of you have the experience and it can apply to every situation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, communities are strongest when people feel like they're supported and included and just able to participate in everyday life. But from your perspective, if you consider, what does a truly welcoming or accessible community look like?
I think it fundamentally looks like, everybody is there and present, and nobody is seen as, different or sort of exceptional in some capacity. So I'm a huge Trekkie, and I think a lot about the fact that in the next generation, when they cast Patrick Stewart to be the captain, I promise this connects, but when they cast Patrick Stewart as the captain, one of the first questions that the media had was like, well, he's bald, and in the future, wouldn't we potentially have solved, baldness? And Gene Roddenberry's response to that was, in the future, no one will care that somebody is bald. And I think that that's really, I think that that's kind of fundamentally how I see an inclusive community, is that, we accept people exactly as they are, and no one cares about the differences. We see the differences as making us stronger and building a community, and that all of the differences are necessary, but none of them are, inherently bad.
I like that, because it's so true. Mm-hmm. If we can just acknowledge there are differences in everything, mm-hmm. and then we're all the same community. So as somebody that supports that community, I guess, what would you look at and say gives you the most hope when you look forward at your communities?
I think that we are seeing year over year more and more empowerment of people to advocate for themselves, and more of people in my positions recognizing that the way that we include people and the way that we support people with disabilities is to listen to those people and let them decide what is best for them. That we should not be deciding from the outside without the experience, what the best thing is for someone with a disability or mental health issues, that we go to the community first and say, I had a thought about how to address this issue, but does this make sense? Is this something that you would want, or is this not even a priority for you, and you actually think that we should be solving something totally different? And I think that that's where we're starting to see more and more, people with disabilities, people who have had the experience, be the stakeholders rather than, people sort of talking for them.
That's so important. I think as you're speaking with people and they're sharing their stories and their insights on what to pursue or not, how does it make you feel to know that you're the trusted voice, that they're coming to you and you speak for them?
I mean, it makes me really proud that people are comfortable enough to come and to talk to me and say, this is what I really need, and no one's been listening to me, and but you're somebody that I've been told is someone who will listen, and you're somebody that you helped this other person, and I know that you listen. It makes me really proud to be able to have that trust from people who, in many ways, have had their trust betrayed over and over again because they thought that people would help them and instead are acting for them and not with them.
That's so important to be recognized. I guess as people have brought their issues to you, is there any one thing that stands out as whether it took you by surprise or the one thing that you're like, I got that across the finish line and it was a real accomplishment? What stands out?
I practiced criminal defense before I came into the legislature, and I think that everybody is aware that there is a pretty significant crossover between disability and criminal justice and the criminal justice system, and that crossover is not good. Our criminal justice system, our prison system, is not equipped to be able to support people with disabilities in the way that they need to be supported. And so I've been really proud of the fact that we're having those conversations now a lot more than we were when I first started, is seeing the ways in which people with disabilities may be criminalized for the fact that their disability interacts with the world differently than a normal person that we have written the laws for. And so the way that somebody behaves or the way that they act, that we don't need to, or the best way to handle a situation is not necessarily to charge someone with a crime, that there are better ways that we can address that. And so I think that the thing that I am most proud of is getting a lot of my colleagues to start thinking about how, the criminal justice system reacts to disability and finding different ways to address that.
And I appreciate that you share that, because I do think not only listening to the folks in your community, but what you've done to share with the others in legislature is huge. And that really does connect the community. So thank you for joining me and sharing that information.
Yeah, thank you.
Today we're joined by Senator Devlin Robinson, who represents Pennsylvania's 37th Senate District in Allegheny County, with a background in military service, business leadership, and public service. You focus very much on veterans, senior citizens, and other issues that matter deeply to the folks that you serve in Western Pennsylvania. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I know you've worn a lot of hats. You've been a business leader, a Marine, and now as a state senator. So what part of your background would you think most influences how you serve people today?
The one thing that, I think that is a constant theme throughout my life is, when you're presented with challenges, you have to figure out how to complete those challenges. The Marine Corps motto is improvise, adapt, and overcome. And that's really what I take to every challenge that I meet, whether it be in business, whether it be in the Senate and government, or even my personal life. A lot of challenges will present themselves, and you have to improvise, adapt, and overcome.
I like that, and I think it does apply in so many ways to everything in life. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that I know that you've worked closely with veterans and with military families. So what lessons from that community could help us better support people with disabilities and their caregivers?
In the Marines, I was in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and there was a moment where General Mattis had called for a stand down. And what that means is, you just stop and you let everybody kind of collect themselves before you continue with the mission. And every once in a while, especially, as you're going through life, you're going through work or anything else, sometimes you are continuing to try to evolve and try to complete that mission that you sometimes may be going past your support element. And so if you stand down, you stop, and you kind of collect yourself, you're able to then move forward in a better manner. And so, that's what drew me to work with the veteran community is, you're constantly trying to fix a situation, and sometimes you lose sight of what the situation is or where you came from that got you to this point. So, let's get some support. Let's stop what we're doing, get the support, and then we'll be able to come up with a plan and start moving forward.
I think that's great advice for anyone, but definitely some of that rings true as a caregiver. I think that concept of step out for a moment and kind of reevaluate. So I appreciate that advice. Shifting a little bit, we're talking about the disability community. So when you think about making communities more accessible and inclusive, where do you think small changes could make the biggest difference?
Well, we were working on an accessibility code bill in the Senate, and we wanted to make sure that we found and heard from that community to say, what do you see are challenges that you're experiencing throughout your everyday life? And we wanted to work on that, and if it, if it could be something that we could change, because a lot of times some people, will look over those challenges as we're continuing through our everyday life. So if that's something that we could do, and it's, a legislative fix, we can go in and we can target that. We improve the elevator code bill. We have hunting permits for disabled veterans. We have impairment designations on driver's licenses now, so that when people who have an impairment are pulled over, the police officer knows that they may be nonverbal, they may be hard of hearing. There's a veteran designation on that license. So the police officer knows, we have a little bit more care or a little bit more understanding that we have to deal with in this stop.
I really appreciate that you started that basically saying that you go to the people with lived experience to get their information. So I appreciate that. And I think these things you're talking about, each one of them may be a little thing, but even the designation on a driver's license is going to make that interaction so much better for all parties involved. So that is all good stuff, and we appreciate the efforts that you make for the disability community. And so let's also look ahead. When you look at Western Pennsylvania and the district that you serve, and you think about what that will look 5 years from now, what gives you the most hope?
I think Pittsburgh is an up-and-coming city. Being that I represent Pennsylvania, people will talk about the differences between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And I always say, Philadelphia is a big city. Pittsburgh is a really big town. And Pittsburgh has always been at the forefront of innovation. We are nimble. We went from a manufacturing hub to the technology hub. And I think that there's a lot of potential that is going to burst out in the near future.
Well, that's all great information, and I really appreciate you being here and your efforts. And I think the things that you are doing to move things forward for accessibility and build a stronger community, that is connecting our community.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here with me is Pennsylvania State Representative Jen Mazzocco, and you serve the 42nd District. I appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
You are a new representative,
Yes.
elected by special election, and you're making your first appearance at the Disability and
Yeah.
Mental Health Summit. What made it important for you to be part of this event and connect with the community here today?
Well, first of all, it was obviously my predecessor, Judge Miller, now former representative. This was his baby, his vision. It was something that he brought to the district, but then it's expanded beyond that. I believe there are a lot of people in our district that really care a lot about this event. And of course, people in the broader community that have come to, really find it to be a good resource, to be somewhere where they can be heard, they can be seen, they can be listened to. And so it was really important for me to not abandon that service to the community. So we were really fortunate that Reps Benham and Kincaid were willing to kind of shepherd it along in that period when I wasn't in office yet. But even when I was running for office, I knew I wanted to make sure that we kept this event, just because it is something that has become such a marquee, thing for people. And on top of that, it's a really important topic to make sure that there is a loud voice for. So, Dan was always a huge advocate for people with disabilities and for mental health resources. I know we have, many other of our legislators care about those issues, but I want to make sure that, it's still at the forefront of people's minds. I was a teacher before this. So I taught in Pittsburgh Public Schools at Alderdice High School. So, I've had a lot of experience with students with disabilities and the way that I've had to be cognizant of how I'm doing my job, but also thinking about the way that the systems in our schools work or don't work for people with disabilities, and also how are we supporting students with mental health resources. So those things have been, a big part of my job before this, and I've seen the way that they can work and not work, and so hopefully I can lend some of that experience to advocating for, at least in our education system, for changes that'll be positive for students. So.
Well, I really appreciate that you honor the tradition set by your predecessor, but you're really involved in the community, and with your history, you know the community, you know what's important, and keeping the discussion of disability and mental health at the forefront. So when you meet with constituents, whether they're individuals with or without disabilities, caregivers, families, what are you hearing most often about challenges that people face in everyday life?
Well, I think, I haven't had a ton of meetings yet. I've been in office for about 6 weeks. So trying to make sure that I make space for people. I think I'm definitely hearing, I did hear from a lot of people how much they care about this event and that they want to make sure that there are still, resources for them. So that was something that, how people have said, thank you for continuing to do it. So I know that that's important to people. I've had some meetings around, I don't know, just a variety of issues, but one that came to mind is we had a community advocate that Dan was working with on a bill to require adult use changing tables.
Yes.
And I think that's something that I think really indicates why this work is so important, is that if, this is unfortunately one of the things that if you're not needing to use it, you really don't think about it. And you might think, it's this small issue in a big wheel of, all these disability issues. But for the people that need that, it really changes their entire way of thinking about just the things that they do in their day. Like they have to plan around going to different kinds of events, being able to participate in the civic and community life that we have built here based on whether they have that access, right? Can they use the bathroom? Can they be able to, have some dignity in being able to help their family member just kind of take care of the everyday things that we don't really think about if we're not in need of that. And so I think I'm trying to, as I'm meeting with people, really think about like, what are the intricacies of all of these things and make sure that those are amplified and appreciated. Like, I think, again, it's easy as someone who doesn't struggle with a particular issue to forget about it. And I think that's the key problem here that we're talking about, is making sure that we're elevating voices of people who have those lived experiences, hearing what they need and want, and what will make their lives better and make them feel like they can be fully human in wherever space that they, whatever space they go to. So, I think that's one particular example, but I'm definitely, it's definitely something that comes up often, and I think it's a big thing that we need to deal with. So.
Well, I think from what you just said, the word that stuck out to me the most was dignity. Mm-hmm. Everyone deserves to live their life with dignity, and I really appreciate the efforts that you're taking to think about those things and what else could be done. So as people may come to you or your office, what is it that you think folks may find at your office that they will feel comfortable knowing that you are a resource to the community as a whole, or the disability community specifically?
Well, we're very conscious about, having a wealth of resources in our office available. So just whatever kind of the particular issue is, we have pamphlets, and I think that's one thing. But we also, our staff has really been, over the years, this is at the forefront of their minds, and so they have lots of connections to people. They know, I had somebody ask us about, and I'm new to this, so I don't know the answers actually, and so I really rely on my staff a lot. And I think that's something we all have to keep in mind too, is that like individually we don't always have the answer, but the key thing is how can we get an answer for somebody, or at least get them help, and a connection that might be useful. So I met someone, this was like literally before I was sworn in, I think, so it was like, I'm barely even in the job yet, that had a concern about, affordable housing, and they were trying to get into a housing, to an apartment. And they said, we're really having trouble getting access to this. We're not sure like what to do. And, personally, I wasn't even sure that our office could help. I didn't know if it was a state issue or a federal issue or what. And, like I said, I was brand new. And so I go in and I ask Louise, who's, our office director, hey, I had this thing come up, and she's like, oh yeah, I know the person over here and over there, and I can call them. And that's institutional knowledge. That's her spending a decade, but it's because also that not only is she really good, but we've prioritized it in this office, in the 42nd office. And so hopefully that can continue, where it's not just, oh, this is not something I need to worry about or I need to learn about. Like, our staff is going to be, learning from Louise and Lindsay, to be able to have those little kind of pockets of like, hey, I know the person who does this, or I know the person who runs this housing complex, and I can call them and ask them about an application. So like, I think those things are really important, and our office has done that, and our office will continue to do that with me there, because it's going to be an important thing for us to continue, I think. So.
That's huge. I mean, it can't always be one person. It's
Right.
the network.
No, but it's building up that knowledge and sharing it with each other, and not just saying like, well, I know who to call, but I'm not going to tell you. It's like, no, we're here to say, hey, I know that person, call them, or and we're just sharing those things. And it's sad that it takes that kind of connection. Like, you have to know who to call sometimes, but at least we can be a place where someone can walk in if they don't know what to do, that we hopefully have somebody that either they know the answer or they can call somebody else to find the answer. So, and I really pride, I mean, it was built around that office by Judge Miller, and I want to continue making sure that people know that our office can solve problems. So
That's what's so important.
yeah.
Is there anything since you've been in office that has been a real surprise to you?
I wouldn't say surprise, but I'd say that like this is going to sound so stupid. There are just so many different issues, and as a legislator, you really have to be not necessarily a jack of all trades. Like, you're not going to be the expert on everything, but it's really about like knowing who the people are to reach out to, right?
Sure.
So like, I am not ever going to be maybe the expert legislator on disability issues, but I know people, who are, and I know organizations and other leaders who have insight that then they can share with me. And, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to learn as much as I can, obviously, because it's not, anybody else's job to, teach me. But I think the key thing is knowing that, like, hey, I don't always have the answer. Who can I reach out to who might have a better answer than me, or might be able to elevate kind of a perspective that I hadn't thought about? So I think, like, to me, that's, again, not surprising. I was a teacher. That's what we say about teaching, is that, like, you're not, like, we try to impress upon our students, like, asking questions, looking for answers, not just assuming that you know what you're talking about, not like, blowing past something because you don't know. And so I think, like, it wasn't a surprise in this job, but it is kind of something where I'm like, wow, there's like so many different things, and it's really important to have connections with people who know what they're talking about to be able to learn from them. So
Absolutely. And I do appreciate hearing that you know that you don't know everything,
Yeah.
but the connections are huge. Mm-hmm. And then real quickly as we wind up here, I just, looking forward, whether it's by the end of your term or in the next 5 years, what are things you look at, in the state that would really lead to being more accessible and inclusive?
oh boy. I mean, everything needs to be more accessible and inclusive, I think. We have a lot of work to do. I mean, like I said, I think, our education system, we need to talk about how we're structuring special education to make sure that kids are getting their needs met in school. And I think that's such a big deal, because if you aren't in K-12, if you're not being supported like truly, then it's going to be even harder when you come out of school to be able to make that transition and to then be like fully, as independent as you can be, whatever independence looks like for you as a person with a disability. Like, you need to have a good education, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that that's done. And I think that, like, thinking about the way that I saw it happening, we didn't have enough people. Like, they're asking special education teachers to have a giant caseload of kids. They're writing IEPs, they're having meetings, but then they're also teaching classes. Pittsburgh Public recently started, or at least Alderdice High School used a little bit more of like an full inclusion model. So we were co-teaching. Are we appropriately training teachers how to do that so they're doing it well and right, so that all those kids are supported in the ways that they need, So I think, like, looking at not just how many people we have, how many teachers we have, are we paying them well to retain them? Are they trained well? Are they supported so that they're not overwhelmed, so that they can do their job really well? And then how are we training general education teachers to make sure that they're delivering accommodations and things like that in a way that is actually helping kids and not just checking a box, right?
Right.
And so I guess as a teacher, that's where I would look to maybe do the most work, is in how we're structuring those systems and how we're funding them so that districts can hire the right people and train them and keep them there, how we're using our IUs to support that. So I think, like, that's all really important.
And I think that that's a great place to leave it, because you're talking about supporting the system that can provide the foundation for people to move
Yeah.
forward. And that is truly connecting our
Yeah.
community. Thank Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.